Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Shack. In the last episode, we took a look at the history of the ZX Spectrum 128, Sinclair's last hurrah in the world of home 8-bit micros before their sale to Amstrad in 1986. We got the machine working and we were all really happy, right? Well, this episode we're doing some quote preventative maintenance, and unfortunately not everything goes to plan. Off we go. Here at the Shack, we'd like to give a huge thank you to the sponsor for this video, PCBWay. They help us out with all of our PCB fabrication needs and make fantastic boards at amazingly competitive prices. And it's not only PCBs that are on the menu. Apart from other fabrication services like CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication and injection moulding, PCBWay also have a great projects library of cool stuff to build from people all around the world. Oh, and if you don't like waving a soldering iron about, they can even assemble your PCBs for you. That's the PCB way. Right, on with the show. Okay, so if you recall, there were a number of things I wanted to do to this machine, either as preventative maintenance or small modifications that people have come up with over the years to improve on Sinclair and Investronica's original design. The goal, of course, is to ensure that the integrity of the original machine is intact, make things reversible wherever possible, and of course the old hippopotamus oath, first, do no harm. Replacing the old 7805 voltage regulator with something much more modern will be our first port of call, and then we'll give the whole machine a good old recapping. We'll add some fresh solder to these wires that lead out from the board to the old 7805 regulator. We'll be fitting a nice modern switching regulator in its place, which is much more efficient and doesn't get hot, which means the big heatsink will be purely cosmetic once we're done. A dab of heat to each wire and then we can pull each one free. We'll remove the excess solder with our solder sucker and then install the new regulator, which is a cute little thing and no mistake. We'll take out the capacitor nearest to the wires to make it easier to install the regulator. We'll be replacing it anyway. A bit of pressure on the legs and a bit of heat soon pops that cap out. The new regulator just pops straight into where the wires were for the old 7805. Flip the board over and solder the legs and voila! We've got our lovely new power regulator in place, and don't it look lovely? Right. Next on the agenda is to recap the whole board, and you've seen me do this a dozen times on different machines. There's only one golden rule with this, and that's to check that you're installing these axial capacitors in the right polarity. Remember that the arrows on the capacitor casing are pointing towards the negative lead. Remember that and you won't go too far wrong. So let's crack on with this, as there are a few to do. Pop the legs through the holes, then flip over and bend the legs slightly so that the capacitor won't fall out, then solder it in. I'm using a heat of 350 degrees and a lead-free Roysing core solder. And there's capacitor 1 done. Now rinse and repeat for the others. So that doesn't take too long once you get into the flow of it. However, when I turned the machine on for the first time following the recap, I had a picture that instantly faded to black, and now when I turn it on, I only get this. Which means it's time to have a cup of tea and go outside to shout at the clouds. Well, it didn't take long to find out what the problem was. I'd stupidly installed the capacitor at C25 the wrong way round. I guess the golden rule is merely more of a general suggestion as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, installing C25 with the correct polarity didn't solve the problem. We know that the ULA is fine because the TV is getting a stable 50Hz PAL signal. It's just blank. So first things first, let's check the voltages on the board to see that we're getting the right values. I was suspecting that it was the TEA 2000 chip that I'd bloated up in my stupidity. Checking around the board at various locations, I was getting a good signal for 12 volt and 5 volt, so at least part of the power circuit was good. The TEA2000 requires a 12 volt supply on pin 11, but when checking that, it was only receiving 1.44 volts, and that's nowhere near enough. The transistors at TR4 and TR5 form the primary components of the 12 volt rail, and tracing back towards TR4 I was getting a consistent 1.44 volts. So let's take a look at TR4 and TR5. TR4 is an NPN transistor rated at 2 amps, as it takes the full brunt of the power supply voltage and is a common failure point to burn out if there's a short on the power rail. We can check whether TR4 is blown by seeing if there's a healthy voltage drop of about 0.6 volts from the centre positive pin or base to the outside pins, the collector and the emitter. We're getting a good 0.6 voltage drop on one side, but the other is no voltage at all. As is often the case when I need a very specific part, I didn't have a ZTX 650 sitting in my random transistor box, so I had to order a few. So whilst we're waiting for those to arrive, let's install this little resistor which aims to solve a problem on the toast rack where the sound from the AY sound chip through the SCART lead is much quieter than the ULA drives the onboard beeper. Replacing R115 with a 1.65k resistor provides a much more balanced sound. Obviously can't see if that's done anything until we've got the machine up and working again, but luckily my ZTX 650s arrived the next day. Here's the behaviour we'd expect to see from a healthy NPN transistor, a 0.6 volt drop from the base to the collector and emitter. Let's get this installed and see if that sorts our 12 volt rail voltage out. So TR4's been replaced, and with the power on, checking pin 11 on the TEA2000 shows that it's now receiving 11 volts, which we can see from the screen is enough to give us our encoder back and a nice clean display. Happy days! Now to fix silly mistake number 2. This new voltage regulator is being fouled by the upper case when attempting to put the machine back together. It's too tall. So we need to pull it out and put the original wires back in. We can then just attach this regulator to those wires just like the 7805 was. I'll wrap this up in some Kapton tape so we don't short out against anything when we decide where to put it. Now, all of the awkward bits are out of the way. It's time for the soothing bit. Sit back and relax as we strip the machine down, give it all a good clean, put in a new keyboard membrane and put it all back together again. Oh, and there's a fancy tea towel in this for all of you die-hard fans. Enjoy! So there we have it, a fully working, again, recapped, newly regulated, sound balanced, cleaned and shiny ZX Spectrum 128 with a new keyboard membrane as well. I was lucky that the recap mishap didn't do more damage than it did, and once the fault was discovered, it was an easy fix. I'll be doing a special on 128K games and demos soon, and we'll be using this machine to showcase some of the amazing things people have squeezed out of it. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and until next time in the Retro Shack, it's goodbye from me.